If this video appeared to you today, it's no coincidence. There's a wound that's crying out for healing. Perhaps you've already felt it firsthand. That silent pain that insists on resurfacing, even when you pretend everything's fine. No matter how much time passes or how many people try to fill that void, there's something inside you that craves attention, that craves transformation. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. The wound. The most painful place and at the same time the space where light can finally enter. Have you ever noticed how silence is more disturbing than 1,000 words? We often believe we need to justify, explain, defend and talk endlessly to be heard or respected. But the truth is, when you discover the power of conscious silence, you begin to overcome anyone without having to say a single word. Osho said that silence is not absence, but total presence, and it is in this state that you access a power no one can manipulate. Think about how many times you felt compelled to respond to messages you didn't want to accept invitations that drained your energy, to maintain conversations that only wore you down. This habit of always being available creates the feeling that your life isn't yours, but rather someone else's. You become predictable, easily accessible, as if you were people's emotional emergency button. And that's where the wound opens even wider, when you let everyone in, but no one truly acknowledges you. Osho reminds us that living to please means losing the state of witness, ceasing to be a subject and becoming an object. When you try to compensate for your inner emptiness with words, explanations and justifications, you end up reinforcing the very wound you so desperately want to heal. But when you choose silence, something changes. Because silence is a mirror. It doesn't explain, defend or implore. It simply shows who you truly are and reveals who the other person is. And here's the most painful, but also the most liberating point. Many people can't stand silence. They need you to react, to explain yourself, to fall for their game. But when you don't, when you remain whole, something breaks. The pattern dissolves. And from there, you begin to overcome not because you fought or shouted louder, but because you stopped participating in the cycle of manipulation. The wound is where the light enters. Maybe your wound is the guilt of always giving in. Maybe it's the feeling of never being enough. Maybe it's the exhaustion of always being available. But precisely at this point of pain is where transformation happens. Conscious silence isn't running away, it's not hiding. It's a form of healing. It's your chance to reconnect with something no one can steal, your peace. Have you ever noticed how some people only reveal their true colors when you say no? Silence has this power. It removes the mask, reveals intentions, and separates what's true from what's merely self-interest. And when you learn to use this silence not as a weapon, but as a presence, you stop being held hostage by the gaze and approval of others. The wound that was once pain becomes a portal. And that's why this video found you today. Because maybe you're tired of repeating the same patterns, of feeling drained, of living your life trying to be understood, but never truly seen. There's a calling within you for something greater, to stop wasting energy on explanations that don't heal and start cultivating the strength of simply being. The question is, are you ready to let the light shine through your wound? Are you ready to discover how silence can be the key to overcoming anyone without saying a word? Because the path begins right here. If what I've said so far has touched a nerve within you, I want you to do something right now. Write the phrase in the comments. I choose my peace. It's not just a loose phrase, it's a commitment to oneself, a first step toward transforming wounds into strength. Every time someone shares this, a collective energy of healing is created, a community that no longer lives hostage to explanations and justifications, but chooses conscious silence as a path to liberation. And before I continue, I need to remind you, understanding this content isn't just about passive listening. It's about feeling, about letting the words penetrate the place where the wound still throbs. It's precisely there, at that most sensitive point, that transformation begins. If you simply consume it and move on, you miss the opportunity to integrate what can truly change your life. So, if this video resonated with you, give it a like now. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe. With each video, you'll receive reflections that aren't just pretty words, but profound reminders that your peace, your silence, and your presence are the key to overcoming anyone and any situation. You're always explaining yourself, but no one really understands you. You feel like the more you help everyone, the less anyone helps you. It's as if you're constantly available, always ready to lend a helping hand, to say the right word, to lend a shoulder. And ultimately, when you need it, you realize that the silence of others is deafening. This wound hurts deeply because it reveals a truth that's hard to accept. You've often given your all in relationships, friendships, and work environments, but never received back in the same measure. What remains is a void, a feeling of permanent exhaustion, as if your energy is being drained and there's nothing left for you. Osho reminds us that when you live to please, you cease to be a presence and become an object. And being treated like an object is the source of many invisible wounds. Think about how many times someone only contacted you when they needed something. Think about how many times your phone rang, not because someone wanted to know how you were, but because they needed you to solve something. You've become predictable, an emotional emergency button. People know that when they press that button, you'll be there, ready to relieve, but after using you, they simply put you back on the shelf. This is the wound. You are unseen. You are used. And the cruelest part is that you yourself, in silence, allowed this to happen over and over again. You believed that being good meant always being available, that loving meant never saying no, that caring meant sacrificing yourself. But the truth is that the wound grows every time you repeat this pattern, and the more you nullify yourself to others, the further away you become from yourself. The weight of this is brutal, because constantly trying to explain yourself generates constant guilt. You feel guilty when you say no, guilty when you don't respond right away, guilty when you choose to rest. But this guilt isn't born of love, it's born of programming. Society, family, toxic relationships, all of this has planted in you the idea that you'll only be loved if you're useful, only accepted if you're convenient, only respected if you're always the one giving. And this lie keeps you chained, trapped in a cycle of self-abandonment. That's why silence is so disturbing. Because when you stop explaining yourself, when you decide not to react as expected, the game breaks down. People begin to show their true colors when they can no longer control you. Silence exposes, silence illuminates, silence reveals the truth. It's at this moment that the wound, which once seemed like mere pain, begins to reveal itself like a portal. The place where the light enters is precisely where you've suffered the most. Maybe you felt this before. When you finally said no, when you decided not to respond, when you chose not to be there for someone who always used you. The shock from others is immediate. They can't stand the lack of your explanation. They can't stand that you don't justify yourself, because the lack of your reaction forces them to deal with themselves. This is the power you never realized you had, and this power stems precisely from the wound you always tried to hide. But I know it's difficult. I know sometimes you wonder, am I being cold? Am I becoming insensitive? This doubt is natural, because you've been conditioned to believe that only self-denial is good. But Osho said that true love isn't attachment. It isn't blind sacrifice. It isn't losing yourself in the other. True love is born of awareness, and awareness only blossoms when you respect yourself, when you see yourself, when you no longer treat yourself as an object. This is pain accurately named. Self-abandonment disguised as kindness. The wound of those who always explain themselves and are never understood. The pain of those who always give and almost never receive. And when you acknowledge this pain, you begin to transform it. Because naming the wound is the first step to letting the light in. Now tell me in the comments if this has ever happened to you. Write the sentence, "I refuse to be an object." This statement is not just a comment, it is a milestone in your healing process. It is the beginning of your liberation. Protecting your energy isn't selfishness, it's spiritual intelligence. This phrase needs to be repeated until it becomes a mantra within you, because that's exactly where many go astray. They believe that taking care of themselves means abandoning others, when in fact, it's the opposite. Osho taught us that we can only share something true when we are full inside, when the source isn't dry, when we're not giving away our last crumbs of energy just to sustain a role others have imposed on us. When you exhaust yourself trying to please everyone, you lose not only your peace but also your presence. Silence is not absence, it is total presence. This is what Osho repeated in his talks. Silence is not emptiness, it is not coldness, it is not rejection. Silence is a presence deeper, more intense and often more powerful than any words. How many times have you been in a situation where words weren't enough to express what you felt? How many times have you realized that over-explaining only made things worse, fueling even more conflict and misunderstanding? Conscious silence is different. It is not the silence of one who flees, but the silence of one who witnesses, of one who observes, of one who doesn't allow themselves to be drawn into old patterns of reaction. Think of all the times you've explained yourself until you were breathless, trying to justify your choices, your absences, your limitations. How many times have you left a conversation feeling even smaller, even more guilty, even more misunderstood? This happens because when you justify yourself, you give your power away to the other person. You give them the role of judge, as if you needed their approval to validate your existence. This is the invisible error that keeps your wound open. Osho reminds us that when we seek external approval, we inevitably become slaves to the gaze of others. This is why protecting your energy is not just an act of self-preservation. It is a spiritual act, because it restores your right to be whole without depending on anyone's validation. It takes courage to admit this, because when you start protecting your energy, people around you may not understand. Some will call you selfish, others will say you've changed, that you're not the same anymore. And in a way it's true, you really are not the same anymore. You're learning to be someone who respects yourself. The weight of other people's words will lessen when you realize they don't define who you are. And that's the turning point. When you stop seeking permission and start living in presence, conscious silence disarms any manipulation. It effortlessly exposes what the other person is trying to hide. It reveals intentions, it reveals weaknesses. It takes away the power of those who need your reaction to feel in control. And this doesn't mean being harsh. Quite the opposite. When you are in conscious silence, your presence is more loving, because it is not reactive, not burdened by guilt or fear. It is a pure presence, one that illuminates. This is why Osho said, "Silence is not absence, it is total presence." This is the invitation for you to realize that you don't need to justify yourself to be seen. You don't need to defend yourself to be respected. Your energy is your temple. Allowing anyone to enter without awareness is like leaving doors open in the middle of a storm. Everything is lost, everything becomes disorganized, everything wears out. But when you close the doors wisely, it isn't isolation. It's spiritual intelligence. And here I want to invite you to reflect deeply. How many times have you felt like you wasted your energy by explaining yourself too much? How many times have you wanted to simply remain silent, but ended up giving in to the urge to justify? This is proof that you need to start using this mantra as a guide. Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's spiritual intelligence. Repeat this as many times as necessary until it becomes part of you. Now, to consolidate this learning, I want you to write the sentence in the comments. My silence is my presence. It's not just a comment. It's a declaration, a milestone. Each time you write, you reinforce within yourself the choice to never abandon yourself again, to protect your energy, and to understand that conscious silence is the key to transforming your wound into light. The conditioned mind loves patterns. Witnessing dissolves the pattern. This quote from Osho sums up exactly what happens when you begin to see the invisible dynamics that have been trapping your energy and keeping your wounds perpetually open. By now, you've understood the importance of protecting your energy. You've realized that silence is not absence but total presence. But now we need to go even deeper and observe the mechanisms that make you fall repeatedly into the same cycle of pain. Because simply naming the wound isn't enough. You need to understand the map of the problem, the silent workings behind your choices, for the pattern to finally break. The first point of this map is simple and devastating. Predictability breeds use. Whenever you become predictable, you become manipulable. Notice how people already know exactly how you'll react. They know that if they ask for a favor, you won't say no. They know that if they raise your voice, you'll give in to avoid conflict. They know that faced with an awkward silence, you'll quickly rush to explain, justify, and defend yourself. And precisely because you're predictable, you become easily controlled. This doesn't just happen in romantic relationships, but in all areas of life, at work, with family, with friendships. It's as if your energy is exposed, and others know exactly where to press to get the response they want. This predictability stems from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of appearing cold, fear of disappointing. So you anticipate, explain, justify, repeat old patterns of behavior that others have already memorized. And the more predictable you are, the more people use that pattern against you. That's why so many feel trapped in toxic situations that never change, because the other person already knows the entire script. You become a character in a script you didn't write, but agree to play out every day. The second point is even deeper. Guilt keeps you trapped. Guilt is the cement that solidifies this cycle. When you try to say no, you quickly feel like you're failing. When you choose to protect yourself, you feel the weight of judgment. When you decide to prioritize yourself, your conditioned mind starts screaming, "You're being selfish." This guilt wasn't born with you. It was planted, cultivated, and repeated until it became part of your identity. Perhaps it began in childhood, when you were told you needed to be obedient, available, and submissive to be loved. Perhaps it was reinforced in abusive relationships, where the other person fed off your inability to put yourself first. Guilt is the perfect weapon to keep you silent, but not in conscious silence, in silence that suffocates, nullifies, and empties. Understand how guilt is the opposite of presence. It drags you back to the past, to all the times you messed up trying to protect yourself, and it projects you into a future filled with fear. Fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of abandonment. Meanwhile, the present, the only place where your energy can truly exist, fades away. This is where the big shift comes in. When you witness guilt, without fighting it, without explaining yourself, without giving in, something begins to change. Osho said that observing the mind is already dissolving the mind. Witnessing is already the beginning of liberation. And we come to the third point. Conscious silence breaks the pattern. This is the secret few understand. Silence isn't just an absence of words, but a suspension of the game. When you don't respond as you always have, the cycle breaks. When you don't deliver the reaction the other person expects, the manipulation loses its power. It's as if the entire chessboard has been dismantled because you've decided to stop moving the piece predictably. Conscious silence is revolutionary because it doesn't enter the fray, but it diffuses the fray. It doesn't give in to blame, but it also doesn't create more resentment. It simply observes. This silence is disconcerting because most people have never known how to deal with it. They expect you to explain yourself, defend yourself, get angry, scream, cry. They need your reaction to confirm their control over you. But when you remain in conscious silence, when you simply witness, something much greater happens. You not only break the external pattern, but you begin to break the internal patterns as well. The conditioned mind, the one that repeats old scripts, begins to lose its power. The space of presence opens, and within it, light enters the wound that previously knew only darkness. And perhaps you've felt a bit of this yourself. Perhaps at some point you chose not to react and, for a few seconds, realized that the power wasn't in the other person, but in you. Perhaps you've seen how people reveal themselves when silence appears. It's in that moment that the map becomes clear. Predictability breeds use. Guilt keeps you trapped, but conscious silence breaks the pattern. This is the movement that transforms, not because you've become stronger in the eyes of others, but because you've stopped being a slave to the need to react. For this to become real within you, it takes more than just hearing it. It takes embracing it. That's why I want you to write this phrase in the comments now. I break my patterns. This phrase is a reminder that you are no longer willing to live as before, that you acknowledge your wound and choose to transform it into light. It's a choice of presence, a commitment to your own energy. By now you've understood how patterns form, how predictability opens doors to exploitation, how guilt keeps you trapped, and how conscious silence can break these chains. But intellectual understanding isn't enough. It's not enough to simply listen and reflect. True transformation happens when you apply this awareness to your daily practice. That's why I now want to propose a simple, direct, and immediate protocol. Something that may seem small at first glance, but that can bring about a real shift in the way you relate to yourself and others. The challenge is this. For 24 hours, don't explain yourself. It's that simple. Just say, I can't do it today. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't try to justify it. Don't try to give 1,000 reasons. Just one clear, firm, and calm answer. I can't do it today. This phrase is liberating because it cuts the cycle of justification at the root. It dismantles the game that always demands an explanation, always a defense, always a narrative to validate your choice. When you simply affirm your decision without elaborating, You place yourself in a position of authority over your own life. You may find it difficult at first because your conditioned mind will try to sabotage you. The urge to complete the sentence, to add a because, to make up an excuse will arise. But it's precisely this impulse that keeps the wound open. By not giving in to it, you begin to shift your energy frequency. You make it clear to yourself and to others that you don't need to justify your existence, that your presence is already enough, that your choices don't require external approval to be legitimate. Think about how many situations you can apply this today. Maybe someone asks you for help with something you don't have the energy to offer. Instead of making an excuse, simply say, "I can't do it today." Maybe someone pressures you to talk at a time when you need some quiet. Instead of writing a long text defending yourself, say, "I can't do it today." Maybe even in small, everyday requests, you'll realize how much you feel compelled to explain yourself. This 24-hour challenge will show you in a practical way how your life is full of unnecessary justifications and how you can begin to free yourself from them. The most powerful thing about this exercise is that it's not directed at anyone. It's not aggressive, it's not hostile. It's simply a healthy boundary set simply. And that's exactly what makes it transformative. Because when you create clear boundaries without guilt, you begin to rebuild your energy. You begin to close the doors that were once wide open for everyone to enter and use. You learn to protect your peace without having to build walls of anger or resentment. It's a boundary that educates, not alienates. Osho reminded us that true power lies not in reacting, but in witnessing. When you practice this micro-challenge, you witness your own patterns. You observe how your body reacts when you don't explain yourself, how your mind tries to find justifications, how those around you react to your simple silence. And in this process, you realize that nothing terrible happens when you don't justify yourself. On the contrary, the world goes on, but you feel immense relief at not having betrayed yourself once again. This 24-hour protocol is a first step, but it's not a small one. It opens the door to something much bigger, because when you realize you can say, "I can't" without guilt, you begin to free yourself from the need to always be available, to always be understood, to always carry the burden of others. And it's in this space that light enters the wound. It's in this space that you begin to feel the strength of a presence that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Now, I want you to actively participate in this process. Don't leave this challenge just in theory. Put it into practice today and come back here to share your experience. And to cement this commitment, write this phrase in the comments. "I choose my peace." This public declaration isn't just about engagement. It's a way to anchor within yourself what we're building here. By writing, you reinforce your decision to never abandon yourself again, to stop wasting your energy on empty justifications, to allow yourself to live with more conscious silence and presence. Silence is not an escape. For those who truly love you, your presence remains. Only the excess that erases you leaves. This is one of the biggest misconceptions when we talk about conscious silence and protecting one's own energy. Many people, upon hearing that you no longer explain yourself, that you shy away from toxic conversations, that you choose to keep your word rather than waste it on meaningless confrontations, quickly conclude that you are isolating yourself, that you are running away, that you are becoming cold. But this is not the truth. Silence is not absence, it is intensity. It is not distance, it is depth. And it is precisely this depth that others often fail to understand. Osho said, "Compassion without awareness becomes attachment. Awareness without compassion becomes hardness. Centering is the path." This means that protecting your energy isn't synonymous with cutting off the world or rejecting people. It's actually a balancing act. When you live only compassion without awareness, you end up overgiving, wearing yourself out, carrying burdens that aren't yours. This excess is attachment, confusion, pain disguised as care. And when you live only awareness without compassion, you risk hardening, becoming distant, inaccessible, incapable of truly connecting. The path isn't in either of these extremes. The path lies in the center, an awareness that knows how to protect, but a compassion that knows how to nurture. When you choose silence, it's not because you've stopped loving, but because you've learned to love more wisely. Silence is the space where you let the other person be who they are, without trying to fix them, without trying to explain yourself, without falling into the game of justifying yourself. Silence is also the space where you reconnect with yourself, where you regain your energy, where you become whole again. And when you are whole, you can truly give of yourself, because it's not an act of sacrifice, but of abundance. Many people fail to understand this difference and therefore judge. They confuse limits with rejection, pause with abandonment, and protection with selfishness. But those who truly love you, who truly connect with you on a deeper level, will realize that your presence hasn't diminished. On the contrary, it's become stronger, because it's no longer a piece of you that appears tired, exhausted, and empty. It's the whole you, the whole you, the whole you offering something true. This is the point that needs to be clear. Silence is not a wall. Silence is not coldness. Silence is the courage not to get lost in justifications, the maturity not to react to every trigger, the wisdom not to let yourself be sucked into conversations that drain your energy. And at the same time, silence is also a form of compassion, because by not reacting, you don't fuel conflict. By not justifying yourself, you don't perpetuate accusations. By not playing the other person's game, you invite them to look at themselves. How many times have you realized this in practice? You chose not to respond, and the other person revealed themselves. You chose not to justify yourself, and the truth came out. You chose to remain silent, and the heavy energy that always dominated interactions simply dissolved. That's when you understand. It's not that you isolated yourself, it's that you stopped carrying burdens that weren't yours. It's not that you became cold, it's that you became lucid. It's not that you rejected, it's that you finally learned to preserve yourself. The middle path, as Osho said, is the only true path. Neither losing yourself in excessive compassion, which turns into attachment and self-abandonment, nor hardening yourself in the coldness of a loveless consciousness, but finding that center, where silence and presence coexist, where compassion and consciousness are balanced. This is the state in which you can offer the other not just words, but a different, cleaner, truer energy. And that's what starts to change your relationships. When you learn that protecting your energy doesn't mean cutting everyone off, but simply eliminating the excess that erases you, you'll notice that the quality of your connections transforms. Because instead of being everywhere superficially, you start being in the right places deeply. Instead of offering crumbs of energy, you offer full presence. This balance isn't achieved overnight, but it begins when you choose conscious silence. When you understand that silence isn't an escape, but a strength. When you realize that silence, at its core, is the greatest proof of love. First for yourself, then for others. Now I want you to reflect on this and tell me, have you ever confused silence with coldness? Have you ever felt guilty for choosing not to react, thinking you were being too distant? If so, leave a comment with that phrase. My silence is also love. This phrase is a reminder that protecting your energy and cultivating conscious presence doesn't distance you, but brings you closer to what really matters. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't disappear. You finally appear whole, rare, respected. This is the true transformation that happens when you choose conscious silence and stop living according to others' expectations. It's at this point that you stop being predictable, stop being the object everyone manipulates, and become an authentic presence, a presence that doesn't need to justify itself, a presence that inspires respect without a single word. And if you've made it this far with me, it shows that this message truly touched something within you. So I want to ask you two things. First, leave a like, because that's the simplest way to show me that this reflection resonated with you. Second, subscribe to the channel now to continue receiving content that will further deepen this journey of healing, silence, and self-knowledge. Each video here is a piece of this spiritual puzzle, and I want you to walk with me through this transformation. And it doesn't stop there. The next video is already appearing here on the screen. Click now and continue with me on this journey.